President LeBlanc, you, your faculty, your board, you have extraordinary wisdom, commitment, and a pioneering spirit. Kimberly, I could just say ditto. Well done, well done. Now, Mr. President, I don't know if I should thank you for putting me on the program in exactly this position where I'm standing here between your students and their graduation. It's not the safest position that I've ever been in, so I will be brief. This is a great, great day. I mean, it is huge. So, how did I do? Can I run for president? No. No, still, in such a huge crowd, it may be tempting to feel diminished. So those of you who may feel too small to be effective, obviously you have never spent a night in bed with a mosquito. So you can think of your degree as like a layer of net that, in fact, you have woven here. It won't guard you all the time, but appreciate it. And by the way, appreciate the family and friends who have supported you and who are looking down on you now. And I think they're worth another round of applause, don't you? Hey, how come I'm still clapping and you're not, okay? You all in the gallery, they're just excited. They really do appreciate you. Now, in my life, I've had the privilege of pioneering some new ideas, like this idea of inclusive security. And that's where you look at women in war zones as pioneers. And I've worked in many of them, like you said, Mr. President. So it's this really simple idea, which is that they're victims, sure, but if you can get women leaders to a negotiating table, you have a better chance of preventing or stopping a war. And some of you are going to be tech pioneers and business pioneers, but many of you, or most of you, I would say, you're going to be living a pioneering life, whether it's within a career or outside your career. And that was really, really clear to me when you all were standing up. The number of you who were here as the first-time graduates in college graduates in your family, or the ones of you who have kids or who've been in the military and coming back. I mean, look, I had goosebumps. So I have enormous appreciation for what this means in terms of you all as pioneers. Now, out west where I come from, when you think about a pioneer, you think about an explorer. And particularly, I'm in the Denver, Colorado Springs area. So I think about Zebulon Pike, who joined the Army when he was 15. And when he was 27, he led an exploratory expedition. And so I don't know how many of you have seen this, but you go across the Great Plains, and then boom, the Rocky Mountains. And Zebulon Pike turned to the men next to him and said, "That is a mountain no man will ever climb." Today, there's an annual marathon up and down Pikes Peak. So I think the point is obvious, and I don't want to go on foolishly pontificating over and over, although I am from Harvard, and so I know everything in creation and beyond. So it is a little tempting. But I think I would rather end by telling you two pioneer stories that have really shaped me as I look back. The first is when our country was really caught up in a cluster of social movements. And two of the main ones of those were the civil rights movement and the women's movement. So go with me now. The setting is 1979, and I'm 29 years old. Okay, so I'm in Dallas, Texas, a very conservative place, and I'm at the Petroleum Club, and the petroleum industry is a very conservative industry. Right, and so I'm going to have lunch, and I go up this tall building in an elevator. The elevator doors open, and there's this tall man in his red suit and his very dark skin. And I say, hi, I have a reservation here for lunch. And he said, welcome. And I said, my name is Swanee Hunt. And he said, yes, Miss Hunt, we have a beautiful table for you over here. And I say, well, actually, that's the ladies' dining room, and I have a reservation in the main dining room. Now, the main dining room is the place where the business deals are made. And he said, I have a beautiful table for you over here by the window. And I said, actually, I can see my name on the reservation over here in this table in the main dining room. Now, those of you who aren't from the United States may or may not realize that Swanee is a very unusual name, so no one knows if you're a male or a female. And that's how all of this happened, that they let me make a reservation in the main dining room, not knowing that I was a girl or something, right? We go back and forth, and at the end, he says to me, Miss, I can show you into that room, but it's going to cost me my job. And that was one of these life-changing moments where I realized that I might have standing in an oil company, but I actually had more in common with him because he couldn't sit in that dining room either. And when I think about what that story means to me, it was that moment that connected me with people who were like in another world, whether they were on the other side of town or on the other side of the world. Which takes me to a second story. And in the second story, this is in a place that your school knows more about than almost any school. The time is 1995. It's about 2 decades after the Petroleum Club story. The place is Rwanda. And those of you with military experience will be particularly interested. This will resonate with you. Because at that point, 10% of the population has been slaughtered in 100 days. Now, you do the math. This is beyond disease or traffic accidents or tornadoes. That means this summer, 30 million Americans will be killed on our own soil by terrorists. Let me say it again, 30 million Americans killed this summer by terrorists on our own soil. Can you imagine? No, of course. Of course, none of us can imagine. So, I mentioned earlier this idea of inclusive security. And so let me put a human face on it. And the human face is Anne-Marie Musabimungo. At the end of the genocide, there were a large number of Hutus who fled. And they fled into Congo. And they fled because they were fearing retribution from the remaining Tutsi. Anne-Marie was one of them. She fled with her 2-year-old. And she was in an awful refugee camp. The conditions were so terrible, including disease and starvation, really, that eventually she said, it can't be worse back in Rwanda. It can't be worse than what I'm experiencing here. And she went back, and she was astounded by the reaction of the people in Rwanda, her people, when she came back. And she was astounded because so many of the people in her group, the Hutu, had been the perpetrators. So she decided that she was going to go back and make the trip deep into the jungle to try to find her husband. Now, this was a treacherous and gutsy trip for her because her husband, in fact, was the chief of intelligence in an insurgent faction. It took several weeks, but eventually she found him and she convinced him to leave in secret. And after he did that, there were hundreds that followed. Anne-Marie ended up serving 5 years in the parliament, and she and her husband, in addition to their own children, and this is unimaginable to us from a distance, they also adopted 3 children who were Tutsi, who were orphans, whose parents had been killed in the genocide. So when I talk about women and what they can accomplish in war zones as pioneers, I'm thinking about Rwanda, and I'm thinking about the fact that 64% of the parliament is female. Now, I'm sure you want to know about the United States. We are a whopping between 18 and 20%. In fact, we're about 100th in the whole world in terms of our percent. Half of the cabinet and half the Supreme Court are also female. And the result, they've doubled life expectancy. And may I say, do I dare say it? It's partly because of mosquito nets. They also, because of the stability they brought to their country, Rwanda has become the tech capital of East Africa. And so, let me close by saying that these remarks are not, in fact, about anyone on this stage. They're not for me. They're not for that tall black man in his red coat. They aren't about Anne-Marie. They're about you. And the question, the basic question, is how are you pioneering? And what will be the setting of your own stories? Now, those of you who can answer that question, I have some very sobering news for you, and that is, you're wrong. And if it lowers your anxiety to plan, then go ahead and plan. But we plan and God laughs. And I'm not just making this up. In fact, one of the most influential political sages of your time is Jon Stewart, who said, "How will you know what is the right path to choose to get the results you desire?" And the honest answer is, you won't. So that's the bad news. And the good news, it's not where you get to, but it's how you keep moving forward without knowing. That is the defining trait of a pioneer. So now go into the unknown. You're graduating from a school who's done the same. And that's the most important lesson you've learned here. And you leave equipped. Thank you.